On this episode of AviatorCast, your spouse wants to become a pilot and learn to fly airplanes.
Welcome, aviators, to another episode of AviatorCast. Load up your flight bag with useful flight training topics, interviews, and aviation passion. Let's kick the tires and light the fires. Coming to you from Angle of Attack Headquarters in Homer, Alaska, here's your host and flight instructor, Chris Palmer.
Welcome, aviators, to another episode of AviatorCast. My name is Chris Palmer. It's my pleasure to have you here. Hope that you are well, wherever you're at, and you are taking steps forward in aviation to reach your goals and dreams and aspirations, whatever they are, whether that be for getting a flying job or just for fun, whatever it is. Now, today is going to be a little bit different because I am going to speak and want to speak directly to your spouse, your significant other, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, your partners, okay? Those people in your lives that are meant to be supporting you in aviation. This can be a confusing world for them sometimes because they don't quite understand. So I want you to invite them to listen to this. You're welcome to listen to it with them. They can, you can just kind of stand by and nod in agreement as I go through some of these things. And they can maybe get a little bit more insight into why you want to become a pilot, or how, and how they can support you in doing this. So I'm going to paint a picture throughout this on why you want to do this for them. So spark some discussion, hopefully, that the two of you can talk about on why you're wanting to do this, and maybe enlighten them a little bit on this process. So I'm going to try to discipline myself throughout this. I'm going to attempt to speak directly to the spouse, okay? And I think the most common thing here is probably a spouse, someone that's married. And the most common thing as well is the male going through the process and not the wife, I guess even husband in some cases. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go through that process of just simplistically me talking to the spouse and assuming that the flyer is a male. Okay. So there's something we talk about in aviation, and it is my controls. And I even use this with my wife. And when we are flying an airplane, we make sure that someone is flying the airplane at all times. And so when someone else wants control, they say my controls, and then I'll say your controls, and then there will actually be something on the other end that says your controls. So it's a three-way process. So in other words, my controls, I'm taking this away from you, usual podcast listener, watcher, and it's my controls. I'm going to be taking the controls here for the spouse, okay? And this is going to be exactly for them. So I'll attempt to shape it in that way. Hopefully this is helpful for you in understanding your significant other. Okay, so in this podcast, we're going to cover several topics that I've kind of landed on, where your loved one's passion for flight may come from, because that's what matters the most. Is where is this drive for flying even coming from? Sometimes it comes out of the blue. It seems like maybe even after many years of being married, and suddenly they're excited about this. Why aviation may complete your loved one in a lot of ways. So that's an interesting thing. You know, they've been incomplete this whole time, but I'll talk about that. It's fairly interesting, some interesting insight. The role of time, this is where a lot of discussion is going to come in. The role of time, money, and dedication to becoming a pilot, and how you as a spouse can help. The truth of aviation safety, because I think at the end of the day, we want our loved ones to be safe. We want them to return home. We don't want them to do anything inherently dangerous. So the truth of aviation safety and how directly it is connected to quality training. So we'll talk a lot about that. That's probably going to be where I spend the meat of the time here, because I got some good questions from you spouses in the community, and why your role as a supporting loved one will make or break their dream. And that's kind of a big statement, but you really are the catalyst, the cornerstone to make this happen, or break this process. So I know that there are many of you out there that are supporting your spouse. I thank you for that. This is something that is very, very deep for them, deeper than they probably know or have articulated yet in a lot of cases. And I commend you for allowing them to follow their dreams and pursue this, because I know that that's not always easy to do. I know that for my wife, and I don't want to necessarily speak for her, but I think that she would find this accurate, is that my wife does so much behind the scenes to support what I'm doing in aviation that I can't even begin to thank her, because I could not do what I do with this company, with my flying, without my wife. You know, there are times that she's at home with the babies and I'm out having fun flying, and it's my job, but I could not do without her. So I really appreciate and honor those of you that are supporting your spouses. So I want to start there in thanking you for even entertaining this, because I know that it can be a little bit scary and odd and weird, and you're not quite sure where it's coming from, and you know, you need a little bit of knowledge to kind of understand. So where does this passion come from your loved one? Strangely enough, it really goes probably deep into the past. Now, passion is a word that I use a lot, and I think a lot of people in aviation use it because it's something that we definitely feel. With aviation, that's one of the best words to explain it, and I actually looked up the definition, and it said a strong and barely containable emotion, and that is definitely true when it comes to aviation. It's also hard to define why we are so excited about it, but that is the passion of aviation. We really love it. We don't necessarily know why, but I want to maybe shed some light on the why, possibly, that this passion is such a thing for your loved one. So it probably goes back to an early age, and probably a lot earlier than they realize. I've thought of this myself and where it came from, and I'm not sure exactly when it started, but I know that when I was a young boy, I played outside a lot. It's kind of before the video game era, and I got to see airplanes flying over my house all the time, and it just kind of fascinated me to see the airplanes on the same path every single day, one after the other, landing at our international airport, and it always just fascinated me. And I remember seeing the lights off in the distance lined up to land on the runway at our international airport as well. And then I really enjoyed at an early age World War II and the story of aviation in World War II, and how there's that fight of good versus evil. And of course, you know, every young boy seems to like battle and those stories of heroes and things. And so I connected with that quite a bit. It could also be something that came because of a family connection, which is always a very powerful emotional connection. Maybe your loved one had a grandfather, a great uncle, a father, whatever it be, that was a pilot of some kind, and feel like they want to honor that part of their heritage by becoming a pilot, or they feel that it is in their veins. And this actually just came to mind myself, but I just realized that my mother reminded me that my grandfather took some flying lessons back in the 50s and really enjoyed aviation. I don't ever remember talking about that when I was a young boy with my grandfather. He apparently gave it up for family, but I just, it can be a deep family connection. It can take just one or two flights or going to the airport and looking through the fence that can connect a child to aviation. I also remember when I was about 11 or 12 years old, going on my first small airplane flight with my dad and a colleague of his to go look at some real estate. And I remember being in the back, very cold, but I really enjoyed it. And still in my mind's eye, it's a very powerful experience. And so all these touch points kind of add to this bigger emotional connection that's actually deeply rooted in family. It's deeply rooted in love. And for some reason, aviation just makes sense in a lot of ways, and it's like fulfilling a destiny or a heritage in kind of a way. That could be one reason. airplanes are just cool at the end of the day. It could be as simple as that, as men in a lot of ways, and of course women too, have an affinity toward machines, and airplanes are a cool machine. I believe to a certain extent myself, and this is a little this whole thing is going to be sappy, okay? Because this whole podcast, because I want to connect some of the emotions to why we fly and why your significant other may be flying. But airplanes are just cool at the end of the day, and we just, with the family thing and with all of the things we experience as children, to connect to those things, I don't know. It seems to me that the aviation, the more I look at it, it just goes further back and goes to the root of who we are. And I even believe to a certain extent that we were meant to fly. Like, to a certain extent, at some point, like mankind was meant to fly. Okay. And that gets a little bit sappy, but it's true. I think that to a certain extent, and you'll see more here in a few minutes, it completes us in a way. So that's a little bit of perspective on where that passion might be coming from. But I would give your spouse, your significant other, some time to think about where this passion may have come from. So if you're driving, if you're sitting there at your kitchen table or in your living room listening to this together, or doing some chores around the house, whatever it is, pause this for a few minutes and talk about that. Let your pilot, spouse, significant other talk about that for a second. What was it that connected you to aviation, Mr. or Mrs. Pilot? What connected you to aviation? Is there something far back that you can remember that you first started to notice airplanes, or maybe a family connection of some kind? What was it? Those are some interesting stories. I'd love to hear what those are. If you can tell me in the comments or message me, because I almost guarantee they're going to go pretty far back. All right. So pause this and have that discussion and then come back. All right. We're back now. So let's talk about the why. And these are some of the reasons why I feel like aviation has been such a big thing for me. Of course, it's going to be different for everybody, but I think these are fairly common. And I've just tried to be introspective and view it from the outside as well, and see why this could, in fact, complete me, or why man was made to fly. So this is what I've come up with. Flying is the ultimate freedom in a crazy world. So it goes without saying that as society gets more diverse and complex, that a lot of our freedoms are not so free anymore. That more and more there are laws or people or things telling us what to do and where to be and how to behave, et cetera, et cetera. When you're in an airplane and you get to be thousands of feet in the air and look down upon the world, you just get a different perspective about your place in the grand scheme of things. Everything kind of not necessarily stops, because of course the airplane is moving, but everything doesn't matter for a while, because all you're focused on is your airplane, doing things safely, flying along, enjoying the scenery, doing your work, et cetera, et cetera. And you can theoretically point the airplane in any direction and go anywhere. Okay. There's a saying that is overly used, but very accurate, and I like it. And it is that a mile of runway can take you anywhere. And it's so true. There's not a road to keep you on that path. It's almost like a comparison between a road and a runway is a very good comparison to how this freedom would feel once you get in the air, because you can technically go anywhere you want. So the ultimate freedom in a crazy world. And if your spouse has a job, which I'm assuming they do because they're working toward this, if they have a job, Most of you are going to have families. You're going to have other obligations like maybe church or volunteer work or whatever it is. All these things kind of pressuring you to be someone and do something and have a structure, okay? But to be up in the air is this ultimate freedom in a crazy world. Also, we learn a lot of things as we go through life. We start in elementary school. We learn how to communicate. We learn how to write. We learn how to talk, I guess is another way of communication. And then we start to add math and English and all of these things. And eventually we get to this place where we've had a lot of education. We've touched on a lot of different things. Some of us may even go into vocations or degrees where we get specialties, but a lot of it's pretty scattered. When you're in an airplane, you kind of wrap everything into one package. Almost any type of discipline in the world is applicable in an airplane. We deal with psychology, we deal with engineering, we deal with math, we deal with science, we deal with communication, we deal with psychology. I don't know if I said that one already, but there's so many different aspects that we kind of have to be a whole and complete person when we are in an airplane. And so it kind of completes a person when they realize after they go through flight training that they can do a bunch of those things at the same time and have a great result come from it. And it kind of completes people in a way. I know that sounds interesting, but that's what I've recognized, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. But everything comes together in one place in an airplane, and you're doing it for a very beautiful and cool purpose. Again, disconnecting and seeing that perspective. And those are just some of the whys of aviation. Now, this is another place to potentially pause and talk about the why with your spouse. Why do they enjoy this? It's taken me years to define this myself. It might take them a while to define why, but have them think about it. They may even need to step away, but if you want to sit down and talk about it now, you could do that as well. All right, so I'll give you pause here for a few seconds, and then we'll get into the next part of the podcast. Okay, let's get into time, money, and work, because these are things that your significant other is going to need as they go through this process, okay? And I just want to give you a little bit of perspective on what's required of them and what you can do in support in some cases, okay? So let's talk about the time. This does take a fair bit of time and dedication. We'll certainly talk about the work here in a minute, but they will be essentially taking time away from family in certain cases to achieve this. They will need to dedicate themselves in order to accomplish this. It's something I talk about constantly on my podcast. I talk a lot about the work that goes into aviation, the dedication that goes into aviation. Of course, I try to back that up with enough passion to inspire people to go through it, but they will need to dedicate themselves. They will need to spend time away. It's time that they could be spending doing other things. And so there are going to be sacrifices made here in terms of them, being able to do a family thing, dinner, whatever it is, or go into aviation, training aviation, go flying, whatever it is. So that's going to be a conversation that you guys need to have. Make sure that there's a balance. You'll figure out how all that works. Now, if you are really going the distance, or if your loved one's really going the distance and they're planning on a career in aviation, there are a lot of different career paths in aviation. If you are going for the airlines as a family, then you can expect to spend some time away from each other. That's just how it is. It's worse off in the beginning of the career. It gets better as they build seniority in their airline as they go to the deeper part of their career. That seniority is basically where they are in the chain of command to get their favorable schedule. So the longer you're with the airline, the higher you are on that list, and the more favorable of a schedule you get when you request it. And there will be a lot of sacrifices made in the beginning years. Now, there are many careers in aviation that also have, 1 week on, 1 week off, 2 on, 2 off, times where they're away and more times when they're back, or there's even times when they're doing the 9 to 5 sort of thing. So there are a bunch of different options, and that's something that you'll have to discuss as a family. For me, fairly early on, I decided that I wanted to kind of do the 9 to 5 for family reasons. And I know plenty of people that have made it work in the airlines as well. Most people I know have made it work in the airlines, okay? So just throwing that out there as well, that there will be a lot of time and dedication spent there. So money, let's get into the cost of all of this. First off, it isn't cheap, but what we need to realize as well is that plenty of money could be spent on a degree that was kind of a black hole as well. So while it isn't cheap, the time that you're spending flying is actually going to a greater purpose, and you are actually building that time to become a commercial pilot, to achieve certain goals, to take certain steps, which will allow them to take that step up. So it is going somewhere useful, okay, is generally what I'm trying to say. It may not be cheap, but it will be, it is directly connected to their growth and their employability as a pilot. Saving up is going to be a big thing if you can do that. Sometimes you'll even get into loans as a family. I only consider that when obviously there's a career at the other end. That's just something I think is prudent and important to keep in mind, that for a hobby, I wouldn't necessarily, and never did myself, borrow money to do this just for a hobby. All right. So that is what you're looking at there. If it's a career, absolutely think about taking loans, especially if you need to make the career switch quickly. The faster you can do your training, the better. But also saving up as a family for that time when you go for this is also another thing. Or keeping a job and keeping pace with that training as you have employment is also a very good option. All right. $10,000 to $15,000 for a private pilot license, typically 25 to 30-ish at the base level on the cheap side to become a commercial pilot and become employable. Commercial simply means that you can interact in commerce as a pilot. There are some restrictions, but it essentially means you can get a job. So it doesn't necessarily mean they'll be an airline pilot, but it means that they can go and start making money as a pilot with certain applications or companies. Okay, so $10,000 to $15,000 for a private pilot, 25 to 30 total on the cheap side to get to the employable level. There are organizations, schools that will charge more than that and do it faster. So it really just depends on what you're shooting for as a family. There are other expenses along with it, certain equipment that you'll need to buy and subscriptions you'll have and recurring training that they'll need to go through to stay up to snuff based on regulations that the government requires. But over everything else, money is a thing, right? And that's something that as a family, as a couple, that you're going to need to discuss on how this is going to work, have them think through it, think through the options. And really, in this case, I would put the pressure on your loved one that's flying to come up with that and come up with the options, and also challenge them on finding a better way if you don't feel good about it, but also being supportive if you feel like they've exercised all their options, and then you can decide what is the best for the family. So, this is going to be a pretty deep discussion about money. We all know that money and relationships sometimes don't mix well, but it doesn't have to be that way, of course. It's just something to be careful about and discuss. And also think about as a family. This is something that I want to finish off here on the money subject. There are a lot of places that our money can go. Again, we have such abundance here in the United States, and even middle income people have a lot of money that they can allocate to different areas. And the way that we typically do that is through a certain amount of waste, to have fun, to have recreation. So we have a lot of nice cars, right? Nice new cars with payments, sports that we play, and toys that we have, whether that be, ATVs or snow machines or all these other things. And that really adds up. Vacations, all this stuff really adds up. So that's just to maybe step back a little bit and take some accountability together and say, hey, are there areas where we could save or reallocate our funds, maybe have a little less fun over here so that we can have fun over here? And hopefully I remember, but I do want to talk about how as a family together, it can be a lot of fun in aviation to share in these experiences. Okay. So that's time, money, and work. This will take a lot of really hard work to accomplish, and there's really no way around it. It can be a fun process, and it's important that your loved one finds a good instructor that supports them, a good flight school that they fit well with, and I hope you support them in finding a right fit. But it does take a lot of work. So that is time, money, and work. Work goes for itself. You know that you can't accomplish anything without it. And this is an entire package, can present a lot of discussions as a family that you need to have. And really, they cannot do this, and hopefully would not do this without your full support, financially, time, work, whatever it is, that you are a partner in this process, and that it will take certain sacrifices in the family to make this happen. Now, at the tail end of that comes some amazing experiences, blessings, vacations, whatever you want to call it. So I hope that eventually you get to be a part of the great part of aviation and somehow enjoy it in a way. And I want you to have that conversation eventually. Hey, okay, you get to do all this training, but what do I get out of it? That's a selfish question you can ask at some point, but not so selfish because you're being so supportive. So that's the time, money, and work. Now we're going to get into the safety and training aspect, because I know that you want your loved one to be safe. You want them to return home. And I have a golden rule in aviation safety, and that is that the decisions I make, the things I do, all but guarantee that I will return home to my family every single time. So if that's ever in question, then I really need to reevaluate my decision making. I need to choose a different path, and that is how focused I am on the safety aspect. And I believe that we can have both. Okay, I do believe we can be safe, even in single engine, small airplanes, general aviation. I do believe we can be safe, and have that dedication to that we will return home to our family every time. So I put the question out there to my community, specifically on Instagram, and asked for some questions from the aviation community out there. I said, hey, everyone stop, ask your spouse, ask them what questions they have about this process. And most of them fit within the safety and training area. Okay. So how safe is flying is a question that came up. Flying is actually quite safe. So the level of safety on general aviation is a lot lower than you would have on, say, an airline. An airline is obviously highly regulated. They have a lot more checks and balances. They have dual crew that are redundant up front. They have the best technology. And that is because they have many passengers that they're transporting, okay? They want to be very, very, very careful. Now, as we get to fewer passengers, the government is requiring less of that public safety, okay? So they're requiring less checks and balances. And so we do get to a very free and do as you wish, to a certain extent, part of aviation in what we call general aviation, which is where your loved one will start training. And in this area, it is largely up to your loved one on how safe they are going to be. Safety is a decision at the end of the day. Are you going to be a safe pilot or not? And I hope that you can inspire and support your loved one in being a safe pilot. That means not pressuring them into situations that would have them make decisions that are unsafe. In other words, if you have family obligations or things that are pushing you to fly, you need to be really careful, because that can push people to make tough decisions and unsafe decisions. It also goes a lot to how safe you are, goes to how well you're training and how often you're training and how often you're flying. And so having really good instructors, doing instruction often and staying in the instruction or learning mindset is very important for a pilot to remain safe. It's those people that get complacent, start to take risks, start to do things they know they've learned that they shouldn't be doing, regardless of the accidents that have happened, that end up, being the deciding factor in the statistics being more unsafe in general aviation than, say, the general transport or common transport or airline aviation. Okay, so flying is very safe, but it is a decision, and make sure that comes across, that you support them and demand that they be a safe pilot. And if you do that, it's going to wake them up a little bit that all of the other fray that they are learning in aviation is secondary to the fact that they need to learn how to be a safe pilot. Okay. So yes, they can be safe, and flying is safe, but it is a choice. So life insurance is the next one. You will need special life insurance as a pilot, because of those people that are unsafe in aviation. It just changes the risk pool for insurance. And so don't just think that your current life insurance would cover something if something were to happen to your loved one. Make sure that you adjust that and figure out what's going on. They may simply say that, yes, you can keep your current policy, but if something were to happen in an airplane, it won't count, or they may raise your rates. Whatever it is, find out, talk to them. It is different with aviation, okay? That is a risk factor. Chances of an engine failure, very, very low. This is another question that came up. Chances of an engine failure are low. Obviously, we only have one engine. We practice for it a lot in training, just in case. I've never had one myself. I've had other things that were leading up to it, but again, a lot of it's to safety. It's not that you can prevent everything, but there are so many steps before engine failure where you can prevent over time. You can make sure that you are very, very safe with the maintenance that you do and the fuel that you check and make sure is of high quality, all sorts of things. Okay. So again, engine failure is mostly a safety decision, other than those times when, stuff just happens. But in that case, we are trained to deal with the situation, and we can still land. Like the airplane, I say this in a cavalier way, and I know it might freak some of you out, but an airplane then becomes a glider, and these airplanes actually glide fairly well. And so there are options. So just keep in mind that there are options, and you don't just fall out of the sky, and your loved one will be trained in how to do that before they become a pilot. So I have another one to share here in a moment, but I'll share that last. So here was another question: what happens if you pass out while we're flying somewhere? This is a common question that that the loved one, the spouse, the significant other, would want to know how to fly the plane if something were to go wrong. So this is actually an interesting concept, because there are what are called pinch hitter courses where you could go up with an instructor. You could even get to the point where you're basically at a solo level and you could land the plane, essentially. If there were to become a problem, you would learn the frequency to talk to for the emergency, et cetera, and you would be able to figure things out and be able to land safely. Landing isn't inherently difficult to do. without hurting people. You might hurt a plane or something, but it's not inherently difficult to do. So it would only take a handful of hours to do something like that if you were really interested in being able to take over if something were to go wrong, okay? Apart from that, you could even talk about those situations as a couple as you're flying around. And while it is not official instruction, you could have your loved one who is the pilot teach you or tell you what they are doing or what you would do if something were to go wrong. And that would give you more understanding of what is happening and how to potentially make this work. Okay? So that is the safety and training. Statistics show that the longer you are in training, the more you actively train, stay with an instructor, and continue your growth as a pilot, the safer you are as a pilot. It's those people that get complacent and lazy and only do the bare minimum that end up becoming in the higher risk factor pool, okay? So a lot of things to talk about there, but that's essentially it. Now, I want to end with this one, but I want to preface this in a way that is loving, but also cautious. I have a friend, Krista, who reached out to me, and she's become a friend, but actually her husband was a follower of mine, and he passed away in an accident when he was doing some training. And I know that seems contradictory to some of what I've shared so far, but at the end of the day, things happen even on the road. So Krista reached out to me to tell me how much my stuff actually meant to him, and so that we could link up as a family and just start to, I guess, become friends in a way. And we really have. She sent my son a gift a few days ago because my son was sick. She sent him some airplane stickers that he could play with while he was sick. So we have become friends, and we're looking forward to getting to know Krista and her son Hank a little bit better. But Krista wrote me this message, and I want to read it to you guys because I think it wraps up. I think it wraps up the worry of the safety aspect from someone who has seen the ultimate price, I guess. And she has a really good perspective on it, and I really appreciate where she's come in this whole journey. So she says this: aviation has changed our lives, and he left his love, he left his love for it in our son, Hank. And I can see that same love for aviation in my son, Apollo. And she said, never did I think I'd learn so much about aviation and flying. Having a son who is obsessed with a father who died doing what he loved so much, I've opened up my mind to better understand it, and it has helped in our grieving journey. I just think that's a really amazing thing of her to do. So she's actually wanted to learn more about aviation and teach Hank more about aviation to help in the grieving process. For other spouses who share the same fear I always had, remember to keep an open mind and understand they are doing what they love to do. I would have never kept Ryan from that, even now. If Hank wants to follow in his father's footsteps, I will swallow my fears and always support him in his dream. So I think we could kind of mic drop that right now and just leave it the way it is. But I really appreciate where Krista has come in her healing journey, and just it kind of brings together a lot of different things I'm saying, that this is a dream that they have. Things happen, and I really feel a lot of things about Krista and Hank and Ryan. And I really enjoy keeping up with her on social media because she's such a great mother. But that she would never keep Ryan from doing what he was doing, even though eventually what happened actually happened. I just think that that's really powerful. I'm kind of at a loss for words on what else to say, but I just really appreciate that message. So let's polish all of this off with support. Okay. So, right now for you as a spouse, as a significant other, it may not make total sense, this aviation thing. And it doesn't in a lot of ways. It's kind of a weird process. Why are you so obsessed with flying? This is so interesting. Deep down, there's a desire for your loved one, the pilot, to complete something within themselves. That could be a family story. It could be something for them they feel they need to be complete in an airplane. And again, in an airplane, often bringing in all these different aspects can just make someone complete, make everything in a fuzzy world make more sense. And I think in a lot of ways, the desire can't really be met anywhere else but aviation. And once you have that desire, once you have that passion in aviation, it very rarely leaves. It might be dormant for a while, but then it'll just pop up. And you may have experienced that with your loved one yourself, where things were basically dormant and then out of nowhere, they love aviation. Where did this come from? So I encourage you in your journey to supporting this is to enjoy the process. Try to understand it. Try to involve it in your family. Make it fun. Be part of it. Think of what benefits you have from this. So, what girlfriends can your husband take you to go see, or what family can you go see in an airplane more conveniently than you could in a car? So thinking of some of the benefits for you that can come from aviation once this becomes a thing. If you are really concerned about taking over, if you needed to in an emergency, maybe something like a pinch hitter course. Pinch hitter is I looked it up. It's a baseball term for a backup batter that comes in. Okay. So maybe something like a pinch hitter course that you could go through to understand some of the basic concepts of landing the plane if you needed to, and declaring an emergency and things. So ask questions, stay involved through this process, and again, find the fringe benefits. And to just kind of start off or end where we started off, I just want to thank you for being so supportive. This is the catalyst to make this happen. If you aren't part of this, then it cannot happen. So you do have a major, major role in the success of this dream for your loved one. And I thank you for even considering it. And I thank you even more for being a part of it and supporting it with your time and energy and money and love. So thank you so much for being part of that. All right. So that's it. Thank you for being here. And thank you for listening. Hopefully you don't have to listen to me too much as your loved one is listening to me. But I hope that you enjoy this journey. So now, speaking to both of you, I appreciate you being here. And please leave a review for the show. If you're watching on YouTube, a thumbs up, a subscribe. Also, you're my road warriors out there. Share the message of Angle of Attack with others on social media, with your friends. Tell them about what we're doing and if it impacted you in any way. And you help get the word out so that we can continue to grow as a business and as a company that is trying to send across this positive message of how flying improves our lives and in all the many ways, shapes, and forms, from just doing it for fun to also doing it for a career. And of course, you can always check out our online ground school or check ride preparation if you need to. But thank you most of all for being here. You can find more at angleofattack.com. And let me know at any time if there's anything I can do for you. If you have any questions about this podcast, things I talked about, please reach out anytime. The best way to get a hold of me right now is through messages on Instagram. I'm pretty active there and answer those regularly. So again, thank you for all you do, the hard work, the support, and keep taking one step in front of the other, okay, to reach this aviation dream. Until next time, throttle on.
We sincerely thank you for joining us on AviatorCast. Please subscribe through your favorite podcast service and leave a review. Check out more flight training resources at angleofattack.com. There you can find this podcast, many free aviation training videos, as well as online ground school for private instrument, commercial, and CFI. Got a check ride coming up? Check Ride Ace from Angle of Attack is your ultimate companion, guiding you through the process so you can conquer your big day. Thanks once again for joining us on AviatorCast. Turn left, contact Ground Point Niner.